thanks for joining us today on Old Bodies Outside. This is Dr. Brian Peterson, and I am really excited about my guest today, who is Dr. Bess Perry. She's a professor at Michigan State University, and she's a professor of protected areas and natural resources recreation management. And she's done a lot of research into community relevance and displacement within outdoor recreation. She's also worked for the National Park Service and Connecticut State Parks. On top of her professional life, she generally loves being outdoors, and she's done a ton of backpacking and trail running and a lot of ultra marathons too. And she's a lot of the ways that she looks at outdoor recreation and researches it and daily life decisions are built on that she's a lifelong vegetarian and a 20-year vegan. And she has a lot of accomplishments with ultra marathons and just generally thriving and doing great. And so, hey, Dr. Bess Perry, thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, Dr. Brian, how's it going?
Good. So what's the weather like in Michigan State right now?
It's typical gray with just a chance of snow at any moment. And so
nice.
Pretty typical Michigan winter day.
Okay, we are pretty cold right now, and so we're pretty cold here in Kansas, and it's the wind today. We have a very windy day, and so it's without the wind we're probably high 20s, but with the wind it's bringing it down to probably wind chill factor of about 15 degrees or so. But I do have to admit that today I set my alarm for 5 a.m. to get up and go running. And I rolled over, looked at the weather, announced it to my wife who was going to go running with me. And she was like, let's not do it today. And so we ended up going outside this morning, going for a run. The winter is always an interesting time for working out here in Kansas just because of the windy conditions. Do you all get windy conditions up in Michigan?
Oh yeah, it was really howling last night. And we do get quite a bit of wind. And so that's different, right? Like I always have to make sure my ears are covered in the winter going outside for runs or something because the wind is just so intense. Wasn't windy today, but it usually is. And I must confess that I did not go out for my run this morning either because I am in grading jail. And so it's finals week for the semester here at Michigan State. So I need to do my diligence with the grading and hoping to finish that up so I can get out this afternoon.
Nice. Yeah, the wind it's tough for me. I would say I don't mind if it's super cold out. The wind is where I psychologically struggle the most for getting out for a run in the dark about 5:30 in the morning. And when you're getting out and going running, my hands are where I have to make sure they're the warmest. Like I always say that my hands, I guess I say this to myself in my head, but I'm always like, my hands are the biggest pansies. Like they're the ones that always get the coldest on my runs. And so oftentimes, like if I had made it out this morning, I definitely would have wore 2 pairs of gloves. And I would have worn an inner liner glove and an outer ski mitten, which is ridiculous. So I wanted to know, Bess, if you is it your ears that get the coldest?
Yeah. So I do always start with some gloves in the winter time, but a lot of times I'll shed them mid-run. Like they start cold, but my hands warm up. My ears never warm up. And I got my tonsils out when I was in my 20s, and ever since then there seems like there's no protection between like my ears and the rest of my system. And so when the wind enters my ear, my whole head chills. And so I'm a big fan of hats and the ear muff bands and all of that. So you'll see me like kind of, one layer on the legs, maybe 2 or 3 on the upper body, and like, a huge hat system in the winter.
That's great. My wife Jessa just bought this huge ball of cloth, this fleece ball of cloth. It's like cinches around your eyes. And she hates the wind. She hates the cold. Like we differ in that regard. Like she always says that she loves when it's 90, like in the summertime, it's 95 degrees out and it's humid. She loves running in that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I don't really like being running outside if it's above 70 degrees.
I'm with her with the balaclava. I do like running in the winter though, and in the cold. As long as I can have what I need, for layers, I really do enjoy the winter running more than summer running a lot of times.
Yeah, I enjoy the winter running too. Kansas is pretty tough. Like I really enjoyed winter running when I lived in Utah, and it wasn't like temperatures there are pretty mild. It's not that cold, and then you get that like super dry, fluffy snow. And so my favorite runs were always when it was fluffy, dry snow and foot or two of it, and just plowing through it. It doesn't make you wet at all, and it would just be a beautiful winter wonderland. And one of the things that I haven't really experienced too much in Kansas so far is we haven't had any big winter dumpings in the time that I've lived here. And I've lived here since June of 2020. And one thing that I loved about in Utah when it snowed was just I'd be out running and it would have an elevated level of peacefulness because the snow would absorb sounds. And so it just seemed really quiet. Have you experienced that before?
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, and I feel like you don't even have to get far out into the woods for that, right? Like, they don't plow my block, and so I have like, I live in a, typical kind of Lansing, um, uh, you can do it's like a half-mile circle, right? So I know if I go around my block twice, I've done a mile kind of, and they don't really plow it, and so it's just really nice to get out like the first thing in the morning, and it's so quiet. It's just so absolutely quiet, and you're the first footfall across the block, and it's just like it's just a sense of stillness that you can't find in other times of year. And then of course, if I go to my local park or farther out than that, it's even better. Um, yeah, and there's a run I'm doing in January. It's called the Winter Trail Fest, the WTF,
Oh,
and I
cool.
love this one because it's a really nice trail system out at this state rec area, Yankee Springs. It's just gorgeous. And the trails are really challenging. Like there's lots of ups and downs and ice and everything. And it's just really, really fun. It has that sense of stillness. And then right towards the end, you have to do a river crossing. And so it's you get a refreshment. For me, it's like a mid-thigh refreshment. It's a really deep crossing.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
but just the opportunities like that in the winter, it's just yes, you can cover so much more terrain in the summer, but there's like these unique things about winter running, and really enjoyable.
Yeah. So for that race, do you wear any extra traction or maybe carry extra traction with you, like micro spikes?
Yeah, I do. So last year they were really worried about the ice. It's a half marathon. I think there's a shorter option too, but ish, right? Like any of these trail runs, just like ish. I think it's more like around 14 miles. But so last year they were really worried about the ice, and I was getting emails from the RD all of the days in advance saying, you know, the trail is like a death slalom. You got to be prepared. It's okay if you want to drop down. And I was getting like psyched out. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to perish on this. But then I'm like, no, like, I mean, I'm just going to cover the distance. If I have to go slow on some hard parts, I'll go slow on some hard parts. But I wore my trail shoes, and then I put my yak tracks on top of those, which are micro
Okay.
spikes. And I really like that combination for kind of like the bigger grip on kind of the snowy slush, and then the spikes if I need them for the ice. And so that combo I think works really well. And so I'll just put them on in advance when I'm doing a winter race like that. And then the yak tracks I usually just carry in my jacket if I'm doing a run around town, around the trails near my house. And then I can just, take them. They're light enough. I can just put them on when I need them.
Yeah, that's interesting. I see the benefit. I see where both of those have their place, micro spikes and yak tracks. And I've actually never owned a pair of yak tracks, but I can see like, especially if you're going to be doing some city running where that's just like a little bit of icy conditions, maybe that might be a good place for yak tracks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. They, I just got the little ones at Costco at like a 2-pack or something, and they've actually lasted a while. But yeah, the thing with them is like when you're doing like I'm all about the daily adventures, right? So I head out from my house and there's about 3/4 of a mile on the sidewalk, and then I get into a park where there's some trail loops and everything. But you
Okay.
have to be thinking about, okay, like what am I going to use for like the dry concrete on the sidewalk, and then when I get into the park, like the natural surface, and you don't want to beat up one or the other, like on the
Right.
yeah. So that's where I find some
Right.
of these like light options are nice.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you mentioned something earlier before you were talking about your race that is additionally what I love about snow running is when I get to be the first one to put the tracks in. So I especially love that where it's what do they call that? Where you're the one that's kind of in front and putting the tracks down. I guess you're the one that's post holing for people if it's deep mountain snow. But either way, that's something that is also just kind of an elevated piece of the experience for me in winter running is when it's fresh snow and I'm the first one to put the tracks in. I'm like, yes,
Yeah,
I love that.
absolutely.
So have you gotten to do that this winter yet? Be the first one to put the tracks in?
Yeah, we've had 2 snow events so far, and that's probably pretty typical. It's just windy, cold, rainy now, and then January, February is when the good stuff starts. And so, yeah, I imagine that in January that'll be when I'm, because as a mom and as a professor, like a lot of my runs are 4, 5 a.m., right? Like I need to find the time, and that's the time I can find. And so I use my treadmill sometimes, and then when I am able to get out, yeah, usually I am the first tracks around my block and into the park just because of maybe nobody else is getting up that early.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you live at a great place where you have access to a trail network and whatnot, and that's fantastic. At my house, we need to get a treadmill in the house because we always struggle, especially through, it seems to fall every year. The last 2 weeks of January it's just really bad cold and it's just too much. And it's almost like it would be nice to have a treadmill in the house. We need to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I bought one last winter. I was working with a coach last winter, and she advised me to do it, and I've just gotten so many more miles that way, right? Because like it's just so easy and available. And if I need
Yeah.
to just break things up, I can do that. My treadmill's name is Victor. I was debating between Brutus and Victor, like Brutus because nobody wants to really be on a treadmill, and Brutus is like, it's brutalizing. And then I was like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not going to go into naming my treadmill with a negative attitude. It's going to be like Victor and help me towards victory. And so
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
and Victor has been lonely over the summer and the fall, but now we're
Yeah.
now we're rekindling our relationship, and so
Okay.
yeah,
So Victor's patient. He waits. He
that's right,
knows his
that's
time
right,
will come.
yes.
That's funny. So all right, so let's talk about treadmills for a second because I've honestly not put a lot of thought into this, and I've been seeing advertisements for these newer treadmills that get like 30% incline or something. Have you seen those?
Yeah, I was feeling overwhelmed with the decision making last winter, and I
Oh,
read all the
okay.
reviews and everything. And yeah, there are amazing treadmills out there, and then there's kind of like what works for your budget and for your space, right? And so
Yeah.
yeah, some of them are just really amazing. The technology has gotten really far out there, and then but any treadmill kind of does the job.
Right. I gotta imagine so. And then there's also the kind of Peloton approach, right? Where you could almost go do a run on your treadmill with, say, a friend who lives in a different city, probably, and kind of cover the same type of terrain. Your treadmills are kind of incline and in decline at the same time. That's another
Yeah.
probably added piece to the budget.
Yeah. Well, if yeah, I guess I would need a friend who is willing to invest in that like thing with me. But I do like the
Well,
iFit subscription though. I do that, and so I have my treadmill. Like the incline can change. Like I'll go on a trail run with some well-known runner in Utah or in Italy or something, and I'll follow along with them on the trail, and my treadmill will go up and down as I'm watching the
cool.
video on my phone. So that does seem to make the miles go a little bit faster.
That's exactly what's going through my head was just like
Yeah.
you're not in control of the terrain because I feel like when I run on a treadmill, I'm always pressing like up on the incline, then down on it, and so I'm controlling it. But if those ups and downs come without my control, the miles would pass faster for sure.
Hmm.
And something that I wonder you have 2 sons, and I wonder. So there's a professor I was chatting with here at Kansas State University, and her husband own a farm that's pretty far away from campus, and they're out there by themselves, and they don't have access to a gym. I guess she could work out at the campus gym, but they built a hangar at their kind of farm and put all their exercise equipment in there. And I think if I remember correctly, she says they have a couple sons that are, I think, going to university in Colorado. and they're all big into cycling. And so they will get on the Peloton at the same time and cycle together. And I was like, oh gosh, I bet I could see Bess doing that with her sons when her sons move out. That's a long ways away, and I know you don't want to think about that.
It is, yeah. They're only 3 and 6 now, but they I would hope that they have shown quite a love for the outdoors and for being active in whatever form that takes, right? Like just because I run, I don't expect them to run all. It would be wonderful to run together, but I think anything where they're enjoying the outside and trying to keep themselves as healthy as possible. I would love to be that mom, you know, when the kids have left, that we're still able to connect on something like that. And probably like when they're at that age, like there's going to be technology I can't even think about that's going to allow us to do that, even if we're far apart. Yeah.
True. My my niece, she got a Christmas gift, and that it is, in terms of speaking of technology, she loves soccer. And the soccer ball has this technology where she practices like her jukes and her tricks with the ball, and it reports back to you if you effectively did the juke. And so it'll say like, hey, like you need to move the ball faster, whatever it is. And I was like, my gosh, like, and you just saying, you know, who knows what technology will be around by the time they move out. That made me think of my niece's Christmas gift that she'll be getting here in about 10 days. But yeah, I also want to ask one more question to you, and then we can kind of get into hearing about your research.
Sure.
You know, in terms of fostering a love for the outdoors with kids and whatnot, I feel like you and your husband do so much with the outdoors and whatnot. And I wanted to ask you a question about, it seems like every year I see pictures and hear stories of families with younger and younger and younger kids hiking, through hiking, say the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail. Man, like being a professor, like we both work through the summertime. Like, yes, we get a break here and there during the summer, but summer is a time of research, and we do a lot of research over the summer. It's not just like a pure 3 months off. But gosh, like that's something that I've always found intriguing, but I've always wondered, like, what is the lower age threshold? And I guess that almost comes down to maybe the parents, because of how much do the parents want to be taking care of everyone, or do they want the kids to have a little bit of independence so they can carry their own gear and kind of take care of themselves on a daily basis out there? Have you seen some of those stories about families hiking the AT, PCT?
I have, and I think that for some families that is just so much ingrained in part of like their identity and their enthusiasm that it makes sense that that's, you know, however young the children are, as long as they want to participate. We have to make sure as parents that's not our own ego driving all of this. But you know, I do see that there are children who are excited because it's what their family does, right? And we've all grown up in families that you know, have things that kind of are unique to our family, or when we think about it, right? It's things that are part of my experience, but might not be part of other people's experiences. And so, you know, for children who grow up in a family that's all about hiking or exploration, or kind of these long distance backpacking, you know, I could see how a multi-day hike, or, you know, maybe even a through hike if there's time. I mean, there's a lot of privilege that goes into that, of course, but it can be part of it. Yeah. I would say my sons are nowhere near that, and I think that you know, for us, you know, maybe like a lot of families do or would hope to do. For us, more like I feel a lot of satisfaction and a lot of joy in being a family unit when the outdoors is just part of the norm. It's just part of the daily, right? Like we don't have to say, okay, it's, you know, through hike the PCT or nothing. It's just, okay, it's Saturday, and on Saturdays we, you know, go out for a little walk somewhere, or we try somewhere new, you know, where, you know, on Thursday evenings, like everybody walks the dog together, you know, things like that, that I think it's all of those things where, yeah, we're not doing the PCT or anything like that, but it's still, I think, you know, there's ways in which we can all relate to those same feelings of joy and the specialness of outside.
Yeah, and what great family bonding too. I mean, there's a lot of good research out there about just, you know, being outdoors with your friends and family and just the benefits of that and with the relationships and whatnot. And I think you brought up a really good point there of, fostering and cultivating a love for the outdoors can be done in a lot of different ways. Could be done on a daily thing, could be with, hey, we're going to go backpack the PCT, but that might be something that's, as you mentioned, ingrained in their family and the identity of the family. I had the luck to get my stepson out for one night of backpacking, his first night ever, this past summer in Colorado. And we went out to Colorado. That's when I was getting married out there. And we found a night to go backpacking, and we backpacked up to 12,400 feet, actually on the Hard Rock course outside of Silverton, Colorado, and camped at an area called Island Lake. And it was just phenomenal. I mean, we had such a great experience together. And I remember coming down from the mountain that day and driving into town into Silverton, and my stepson was like, "Do not text mom. Don't text her that we're coming. Like, I'm so excited. I got to tell her in person. I don't want her to get any heads up." She was at a coffee shop in Silverton. So we pulled up to the coffee shop and he darted out of the car because he was just so excited to brag. And I mean, everything was perfect for the trip. And one of the things that I was really worried about with that trip was rain. And it was just a lot of summer thunderstorms going on around Silverton. And we had a really clear night, and crew said he counted over 20 satellites just kind of going slowly across the sky. And I think he saw 6 or 7 shooting stars, and then the Milky Way was on beautiful, bright display too. So it was just magical, and just so many things that I was really, really happy that he got to experience and see, and just cultivating that love for the outdoors and whatnot. And he hears a lot about my adventures and whatnot, but he's really not gotten to experience it. And so that one night was really profound. And so I'm really excited to do some more of that with him. And he loves running and whatnot. And so we're actually thinking of, for spring break, maybe trying to get out to a local state park cabin and just connecting as a family together and sitting around the bonfire and just hanging out and having a good time.
Awesome. Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah. Well, hey, so let's hear about your research. And I know that within parks and park management, you do a lot of research with relevance. And so I want to hear first about your research regarding relevance. What does that even mean? And then I also want to hear about your research that you do about displacement. And I know you and I know very well, you and I work on a displacement project together. But let's hear about relevance first, and then hear about some displacement stuff.
Yeah, thanks. Of course, as a professor, I'm always excited to talk about my research. So you and I are both in this realm of park and recreation management, outdoor park and recreation management. And I think that a lot of people are looking at questions of relevance, whether they know it or not. But all of these places that we decide to conserve as parks, all of these ways in which we attach value to how we spend time outside and the activities that we do, these are all value judgments, and they're all things that we decide as a society. We decide as a community if it's a smaller park, or nationally if it's a federally protected place. And so all of that comes from connections that these places have with people. And if we don't do our best to nurture those connections, and to be quite honest, to expand the connections as well, right? Like, parks were established in sometimes very brutal ways, and they can perpetuate legacies of colonialism and displacement of native populations, histories of exclusion. And so if we don't try continuously to not only, help people maintain the connections they have and the love they have for these places, but then also recognize some of these ways in which people might not have those connections because of, maybe their own histories or kind of these broader histories, we risk these places being irrelevant. And we risk these places then not being conserved in the future, right? Because all it would take is a pen stroke for a lot of these places to be taken off the map, or to put towards what is, what would be deemed a better or more useful purpose. And so it's really, I think at the heart, we always are looking at relevance. How can these places be maintained in such a way that people want to visit and want to have the resources stewarded? I think that a lot of research in our field focuses in on those who are already visiting parks. And of course I do a lot of this as well, but that's like, going to a park in the area and doing visitor surveys or talking with managers in those parks. And there you're really getting a picture of, who's coming to the park and what those connections are like. I think what I really think about with relevance is, yes, that is part of it, and that's needed, and that will continue. But if we're really going to be thinking about relevance as this opportunity to make both broad and deep connections, we need to be thinking about those who are not just in the park. And so I work a lot on like the park community interface. So parks and local populations near the parks. I love thinking at the regional level, because I think that when a lot of us think about places to visit in our leisure time or activities to do in our leisure time, or what our place looks like, a lot of the ways that we describe this or that we think about the places to go is kind of, a certain distance, right? A certain distance around us, and that's kind of your region, right? Like I could tell you the trail systems in mid-Michigan where I live, and that's kind of like my habitat, right? You might have, and I think like then if I were to think about us together, it would be like the Midwest, right? But that's a huge region. And I think some of these smaller regions are really where we see some variety of communities, some variety of opportunities. And so I look a lot at not just how can we maintain the connections with those who are already in the parks, but how can we think about the identity of a region or park systems across a region, all of the different places we can recreate on a region, and how those are interacting with different populations in the area. And they don't all have to have the same character, right? Like I'll go to some parks because there's awesome play structures to like mess around with and play rough with my boys. And I'll go to other parks because they have an amazing trail system where I can just bust out some miles with my friends, and I'll go to some others because I just want to read my book by a lake, right? So there's like all of these different ways in which parks serve different purposes. They don't all have to be the same. But if we look at the region, we can kind of see like, okay, what is it about this region that makes it special? What is it about these parks that are special? What is it about the people that is special? And how can we kind of make all of these work together so that people see parks and outdoor activities just as a natural part of their lives, and as parks as this beautiful thing that's part of their lives. So then when we're talking about things about increasing stewardship or increasing this like this conservation ethic across time, or making sure that everybody feels included in these places, people can rely on those daily connections to say, what, those places, they do mean something to me. And if I feel that way about the parks here in mid-Michigan or across Michigan, I could understand how Brian might feel something for the places around where he lives in Kansas. And so it's a way of relating.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, so that's really what I look at with relevance. And again, we can think about, trying to make places relevant for more people. And that would be like thinking about meaningful connections across a lot of different populations. And then we can also think about, how can we deepen somebody's love? How can we make more deepen connections? And that's a way of thinking about, okay, I might go someplace because it has a fantastic trail system, and that might be like one of my connections. But are there ways in which I could really solidify my attachment to this place if I learned more about the cultural history of this place, or about the flora and fauna of this place, or places where I could have picnics or some of these celebrations with my family, right? And so that would be kind of building these deep layers with an individual.
So if people have these deeper connections that are hopefully multifaceted, does that, when we're starting to get to now, we're putting we're attaching value to these places where it's kind of, you're getting a deep connection, you're having a multifaceted deep experience?
Yeah, absolutely, because I would hope that I never have to give up moving around on trails, right? Well, I'm sure I'll get slower or shorter over time, but I hope I never have to give that up. But we never know that. We're all temporarily able-bodied, and so I would hope that taking it personally for myself, that I would have enough facets of my connection to a place that even if something like the trail system kind of has to drop off of what I experience in these places, I would still have other layers of connection to hold me to that, to make me value that place. And it also helps when we try to think about all the ways in which we uh, fail to talk across different people in our society. If I have a lot of different ways in which I relate to a place, I don't have to only talk with the trail runners, right? I can also talk about the ways in which I too use this place for celebration, or I too see the value of the species in this place. And so it's just a way of not only having the places mean value to somebody, but then also building up that value through conversation and through shared meaning making across a whole population.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about parks with a historical and heritage component too.
Oh, yeah.
And I was really thinking about a local park here that I actually serve on the nonprofit board for. It's called Mount Mitchell Heritage Prairie, and it's got a lot of heritage aspect to it. But I primarily use Mount Mitchell to go running and use their trail network. But the information there is fantastic, and I've learned so much about the heritage there that I actually feel like, yes, I go running there and I have I go out there a few times a week and have a great experience out there. I bond with my wife. I often watch the sunrise. But knowing the heritage there and the type of people that were there, like, makes me feel even more deeply connected to the place. And at Mount Mitchell, there's an indigenous burial site that's there. And also the Underground Railroad happened to run through Mount Mitchell as well. There was a homestead right next to the trail network that is still erect. And that homestead is where the Underground Railroad went through with helping people get up to Canada at that time. And so I think I was just kind of piggybacking on what you're saying with this, the multifaceted aspect. And I had never, until you were saying that, really reflected on why I love Mount Mitchell so much. Like, I know I love that place, but I typically am just like, well, I use it daily. I hadn't thought about it at kind of these deeper psychological constructs that you just explained. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. And in a lot of landscapes, like it's wonderful. It sounds like this place is helping you to understand that story, right? But in a lot of places too, we just see evidence of those stories, and it might encourage us to think more deeply about them. I grew up in Connecticut, and in a really rural part of Connecticut near Rhode Island, and my family, we would always go for walks. I think that other people would call them hikes, but I think that also maybe some people are afraid of the word hike because they think it involves like gear and long distance and hydration and all of this. And I
Yeah.
think that I grew up doing a lot of walking, but when we're talking about some mileage and over state park terrain and everything, it might accumulate to hiking. But going for walks with my mom and dad and my sister and our dogs when we had dogs, across New England, you can't go for a walk in the woods without stumbling across old foundations, old stone walls, places that have been reclaimed as we've moved more towards, kind of urban centers and more forested places, and taken a lot of agricultural or pasture land out of production. And so, and of course, that's only one part of the history, right? There's lots of other parts of the history, but I think thinking through some of those cultural connections, or how I'm walking in this place at this point in time, but I'm certainly not the first or the last. It's really
Right.
an opportunity to just reflect on my place on the landscape too.
Yeah, it's kind of profound, and it gives me a sense of smallness, actually, which it sounds negative, but I actually do like that sense of smallness because it's realistic in the way that I perceive the world and how big the world is and how much history is in these places. I mean, we're talking about Kansas, you got New England, even more history. And then if we were out in Europe, even more history. And it's really amazing to have a sense of a little bit of bonding with past people that have lived there and used the place and whatnot. And I find that actually strongly at Mount Mitchell. I know that Mount Mitchell's story I'm hoping to get the gentleman that founded Mount Mitchell onto the show. He actually came across this history of Mount Mitchell and bought the land and resuscitated the prairie to be its native tall grass prairie. It had been farmed for a while, and so the native tall grass prairie wasn't there, and so he resuscitated that. He also has everything blocked off and kind of signed and whatnot, and so you know what you're getting to when you're out there. And I think recently he put all these different pieces of the story into a document and sent it to the National Park Service. And I think Mount Mitchell actually got designated as a National Park Service historic site too, very recently.
Nice.
And so that was really cool to see that it is recognized by the National Park Service as this really special place.
Yeah, it does sound like a special place.
It is. Yeah. I really love being there, and I love that I have access to it. And it's something that, as being a professor, I will probably find a way to weave that story of Mount Mitchell into my spring class that I'll be teaching, and kind of look at how this park is managed from a nonprofit standpoint. Actually, like, they don't have employees. It's the board. The board is managing this place, and so they kind of do it differently. But in terms of doing it, would be fun to take the class there, do a field trip to not only look at the management operations and how that's done from a nonprofit perspective, but also to, discuss this multifaceted history that is really easy to gain access to once you're at Mount Mitchell, because it's so well designed there. And the gentleman that put the place together, Michael Stubbs, has just done such a wonderful place. And it's really a local treasure that not too many people know of beyond this little small area.
That's great. I love hearing about these local treasures, because everybody has these local treasures, and they're places that don't get time on the newscast or social media so much, but little gems.
I think that Mount Mitchell would definitely do great with some relevance research.
Let's do it.
And just, forming more connections on a broader and broader regional level. And I think that you get out, it's pretty wild. Like, I live in a little town called Wamego. Mount Mitchell's here in Wamego, but when I go over to Kansas State University, which is 25 minutes away, and I interact with undergrads or graduate students or faculty or whoever, and I talk about Mount Mitchell, they don't even know that it exists. And so it would be pretty cool to help, provide those opportunities for people to make those connections with Mount Mitchell. And that's something I love doing in my class and whatnot. So the relevant stuff is really great.
Yeah. And I think it feeds right into these issues that we think about a lot with displacement too, because displacement, it kind of has a jargony sense to the word a little bit, but it basically means like not being able to do what you want to do, right? And choosing something else. And when people have this depth of connections to a place, or it's been the place, I've done a lot of work. I did my PhD at University of Vermont, and we were lucky to have strong relationships with Vermont state parks there. And, people really, they're just chomping at the bit to reserve their week in the Vermont state parks, because it's what they have always done. It's what their family has always done, like this 1 week in the state parks there, and people come from all over for it. When we have places like that, where we have these deep connections, if those places change, if they change, socially, like they become very crowded, for example, or if the resource, the nature itself, or the culture itself changes, right? We have ways in which climate can change these conditions, more pronounced storm events or fire changes these places. The people who have really deep connections already to a place are more apt to continue going to that place because of the strength of those connections. So they're more apt to tolerate degraded or changed conditions because their love of these places is so deep. And I can think about places that I would go no matter what, just because they hold such special memories to me, right? If we think about like places, so there's people who really feel that about Vermont state parks. And so I had a paper that came out that I really enjoyed writing about place attachment, this idea about like how much these places mean to us, and likely climate changes in Vermont, changes we're already seeing, and kind of, what would, how would people move about in these parks, or would they go somewhere else entirely if there was more hot days, more biting insects, more rainy days, things like this that we are absolutely expecting to happen. But this is for people who are like already there, people who have already made these connections. So if we think about the ways in which we know parks are changing, and more people have gone outside, that's one I hate to say benefit of the pandemic, but that's one really interesting thing that's come from the pandemic, is people rediscovering their local places for outdoor recreation, right? So we see there's and places are already popular, and so we see there's more people outside, and we see changed conditions with climate and intensity of use on land and everything. But for people who haven't yet made those connections, or for people who those connections are just really tenuous, like it's like the one field trip they took in 4th grade, or it's the, oh yeah, I went running there once, but I don't feel a strong connection to it. I mean, I'm sure that you have those places too, right? They're more apt to be displaced. They're more apt to say, I don't think that place is going to be good for me right now. I'm going to choose somewhere else. Or we hope that they wouldn't say this, but they could say, I'm not going to recreate at all. And so we have these ways of thinking about displacement, and that's that, if I wanted to go to a certain place, I wanted to go to, so I live right next to Grand Woods Park in Lansing, and that's where I go for kind of my daily miles. So if I wanted to go there and I wanted to do trail running, I might think, okay, well, the conditions aren't what I want, so I'm going to choose somewhere else to go trail running, or I'm going to go to Grand Woods but at a different time. Or I'm going to go there, but instead of doing the trail running because it's too icy, I'm just going to take a walk and use the play structures with my kids. There's these ways in which we could be displaced spatially or temporally, or by doing a different activity. There's places we could be entirely displaced, like we choose not to do anything else. And then I think that there's a fourth type of displacement that we haven't looked at, but I'm really curious at. And so my current research, I'm really centering this, and I have some work with the Huron-Clinton Metro Parks in Michigan. You and I have this big project out in Southern California with the National Forest. And that's, what about the social side of displacement? We know that these are places where people are going to make bonds, to make those memories. You were just talking about, this time you spent with crew out in this wonderful place. I think about places where I continue to have walks with my parents when I go back to Connecticut and visit them, right? But if the conditions aren't right for my group to go, would I still choose to go, right? So I think about, my parents are getting older, and maybe I have more concerns about icy conditions or limited mobility or unsafe things, or heat stroke in the summer, right? These things that they just come. Will I change my recreation behavior, not because I don't feel like I could navigate that circumstance, but because my social group might not be able to? So maybe then, instead of going with my parents, I decide to go with my sister, with my husband instead. And so I'm thinking about this as kind of like companion displacement. And for people who are just starting to build up their connections with a place, or they really want to have that feeling of safety and security with a certain group, they might not be able to navigate that, or they might not have the friend or the family or the companion structure to be able to think about whom else they would go with. And so it might lend itself to people just not going at all. And so I think that these are some things that we really want to look at as we think about ways in which parks are changing, ways in which we want to encourage more people to enjoy the places that we all collectively manage, we all collectively steward, we want to value into the future. We need to not just be thinking about how people are kind of moving through space and time and activities, but recognize like recreation is an inherently social thing. And so I know you and I are going to be looking into that when we get into more of our work in Southern California, where we're looking at, okay, I always have to list them on my fingers: Los Padres, Cleveland, Angeles, and San Bernardino National Forests, and the San Dimas Experimental Forest. When we're looking across these forests, and we have conditions of drought, we have conditions of fire, we have conditions of risk, we also have conditions of crowding, especially where there's water resources and a lot of pressure in the summer, right? And all these ways in which managers are telling people, don't recreate here right now, it's high risk. Or people themselves might be saying like, whoa, there's too many cars at the trailhead. I don't want to get into the water if I know that many bodies are going to be out there. If they don't, like, what do they choose to do instead? Are they picking another forest location out of those four, or another protected area place out of those in the region? Are they deciding, you know what, I know this place well, I know it's going to calm down at 6 p.m., I'll come back then, right? Or are they deciding, oh, well, I don't need to go for a hike, I can just kind of lounge by this lakeshore instead? Or are they saying, it's fire risk, and I think that I myself might be able to get out of a bad situation, but maybe I'm with my kids, and it heightens my level of fear for the risk, right? And so maybe I'm being displaced, and I'm choosing not to bring my kids on a trip or something like that, which would be unfortunate. And so all these ways where you and I are thinking about kind of, and my graduate student Erin, who I'm sure she's going to do a phenomenal job on this. And your graduate student too, Bijan. How are we all thinking about these ways in which people might be reacting to the resource or to the social situation and changing their recreation behaviors? And I think that when you and I kind of pair what's actually happening or how they would respond with some measures about how attached they are to these places, what is the level of meaning of these places? What are the different ways in which these settings provide benefits and services for these people? I think we'll start to see some really interesting relationships where then we can help people navigate those decisions, because of course we don't want them to go into a forest if it's risky or if it somehow violates what they think of as a good recreation experience. But we can't just say, okay, that's it, right? We need to say, like,
right,
I know you wanted to go here because you wanted that wonderful family experience where you have, this nice short trail that gets you to this vista or gets you to this water. Today isn't the day for here, but let me tell you where you could go. And I think when managers can kind of understand how to phrase that, okay, it's not here right now, but here's another option for you, then we still encourage these connections to place. We still encourage this idea about stewardship and outdoor recreation without just saying, okay, you came here, but no. Of course we don't want to say that, but it's really hard to understand all the different ways people are connected to place without our type of research.
It's really challenging, and I think that it's one of the things that's really great about our research is that we're looking at environmental attributes and those experiential attributes that you just did a great job explaining, and then how do you then message to the public about, hey, like, we have like the piece that I'm so curious about actually with our research is, we keep hearing about these forests, the 4 forests that you mentioned. They sometimes get closed down because they have a fire, and they have a wildfire. And so people do see smoke and whatnot. They know there's a fire there, but sometimes, and it's happened, I think, the last couple of years around Labor Day weekend, they get shut down preventatively because there's a red flag. There's red flag conditions. So there's no humidity, high temperatures. So they close them, preventatively. At that point, there's no smoke, there's no fire. How do managers then say, hey, we got to close down here? Like, we're really, like, it could have a fire happen. Like, the conditions are ripe. But we know that for those that like to have that family experience on the 1 mile trail, well, hey, there's another location over here that works for that. And I think the other thing, and so that component right there really excites me a lot about our research, is the preventative closures and how to message to the public then, because I think it's easier to message to the public if they see that there's a fire and there's smoke and whatnot. But I think now adding to that too is a fantastic piece of our research too, is just the diverse socioeconomic populations in Southern California and in California in general. I mean, our research spans pretty much from the Mexico border almost up to the Bay Area. And there's a lot of different populations that live there and whatnot. And so another thing that, we'll be considering is, these different types of populations, how to message to these different types of populations, and then speaking to them in terms of their attachments and also the environmental things that they really enjoy about those areas. So I think it's really exciting research. And I thought that, going back to earlier when you transitioned into displacement, actually had never kind of formed that connection in my head between relevance and displacement. And I thought like your explanation of that really formed that in my head. And so I enjoyed that explanation.
It might be because
So
I
cool.
just had to put together my mid-tenure review packet, so I had to actively think about how to articulate this. Yeah, I think there are things that we think about a lot, but making the connections, and I think that's where our research is really going, right, Brian? Is we have all of these concepts, and we know it's time to start looking at them in these really kind of multi-attribute ways, and recognizing places mean so much to so many people. We don't have to just say it's this one thing, right? But we need to understand all these different connections, and then bring it to the level of action, like you're saying. How can managers and how can we as scientists be sensitive to these different meanings and still encourage outdoor recreation?
Yeah, and I love that, doing multi-attribute research. I think that's where you're going to get the best depth, and you're also going to get the most effective ways to help the populations that visit these places, and maybe help some people that don't know about these places to visit them and form connections there too. And so Bess and our research is considered applied science. And so it has pragmatic outcomes of benefiting society and helping society. And so we're not just, discovering that place attachment exists. We're not just discovering that sense of belonging exists, but we're looking into these constructs and how to use them to better serve the residents of California, for example, for our research. And so we're applied researchers. And as Bess mentioned, how long have you been at Michigan State for?
Oh, I moved here just after you moved to Kansas. I started in August 2020, so I'm 2.5 years into being a Michigander, if I may claim that title.
So, and what are we? Are we Kansans? A Kansanite? I don't know what I am. Yeah. A resident of Kansas. I know I was a Utahn for a little bit. A Kansan, I guess. So tenure, is that after 5 years? Is that how that goes? And so you did the 2.5-year mid-tenure review?
Yeah. So you kind of tenure means that they want to keep you for good. And so before tenure, you have 2 probationary periods, and they're split about in the middle. So I've just kind of put in all of my paperwork and had some hopefully successful votes from my department on up about kind of my place, and I'm completing my first probationary period, and then I'll get reviewed for that permanent spot at the end of my second one, which would be about 5 years total.
Okay. Nice. Well, to feel good getting that taken care of.
Yeah, it's good. It's also good too, because a lot of times when, no matter what your job is, when you're kind of in the moment, in the grind, you feel like, I don't know if I'm doing a lot. I don't know if I'm doing good, right? I don't know if I don't know if I'm who I want to be. And it often takes these forced opportunities for like a broader reflection of who you are and how you're contributing and where you're going, to say, you know what, like, of course there are things I want to work on. Of course there are things I'm not doing to the best of my ability, but I am making the types of contributions that I hope impact society. I hope that make Parks and Rec, relevant, for lack of a better word, well into the future.
Mm-hmm.
So the stress of the process is not welcomed, but the opportunity for reflection, I think, came at a point right now when I really needed it. I needed to really think about the good that I've done and the ways in which I am making an impact.
I really agree with the forced reflection, and that actually does have some benefits. And I have to do 2 annual reviews here per year. One goes in September, one goes in January. And so we'll be working on mine that's due in January. I think it's due January 10th. So I'll start working on that about a week before. And it is cool. Like, I think that, a lot of people, we're in this esoteric professor academia world, and it's actually a very, very busy world. Teaching classes isn't just, you go in and wing it type of thing. Like, there is a lot of intentionality that goes into classes. There's a lot of outcomes that we're trying to deliver. We're really hopeful for students to adopt these types of thinking and whatnot that will help them be successful wherever they go. It doesn't matter if it's in outdoor recreation or whatnot. And there's a lot that goes into teaching, a lot of different types of messaging and outcomes that we're trying to hit. On top of that, there's all the research that we're constantly doing. And the research goes year round. And like I mentioned earlier, it's a summertime thing. And so you got all these different things that go into being a professor: teaching, research, and then also the service component. A lot of professors are required to do a service component locally to give back to their community. And so you're just doing all this stuff, and from one week to another, it's a whirlwind of busyness. And so when we have these forced reviews where we have to put together a review package and list out all the things we did for research and all the classes we taught and the evaluations we got for teaching and all the service components that we did, that forced reflection actually feels pretty good. And you're like, okay, like I'm helping out the world. I'm doing something good here. Feels good to see on paper. I see it concretely now, and it definitely does feel good, despite that it's a forced situation. And I doubt that universities maybe look at it quite that way, that we're going to force our professors to reflect. But it's necessary for us. It's necessary for them to also get an idea of what we're doing. And so one of the things that's tough for the higher ups at universities is every professor ends up kind of being unique, and so it can be hard to find measures that are fitting for every type of professor and whatnot. So there's a lot of different criteria and whatnot that we do, so that they get an understanding of what type of impact we're having as a professor, and kind of like our return on investment as an employee, and giving back and whatnot. And so on top of all this busyness that we just summed up, I want to know, Bess, how do you happen to juggle the busy professor life with a mom of two wonderful boys, and you also love trail running and ultra running and being outdoors and doing family walks? Like, how do you juggle all this?
Yeah. Well, I will say, like, I am just the type of person who loves to be busy. I never find myself bored. And when people ask me about my hobbies, I always have to include in the list collecting new hobbies, right? Like, I'm always, I just want to make sure I'm in my limited time here, experiencing a lot of things. And I think that my parents really instilled that in kind of how I grew up too. So I would say, like, maybe some people, their leisure time is very passive, and they need that, and they collect themselves in that, and that's wonderful. I would say I tend to run in the opposite direction. I really try to fill my time. I think that something that I want to share, though, is that it's a real struggle to talk about all of these things I do without getting labeled with, like, the superwoman narrative, because things are hard, and I have to juggle, and I have to make decisions, and I have to drop runs, and I have to drop family commitments, and I have to drop some work commitments, depending on kind of what's going on day to day. Like, nobody is superwoman, and I think that gets labeled a lot, especially for women who are in an intense position with family, and also try to have their own identity, right, and their own hobbies. But I think the other part of this too is that nothing we ever do, we do alone. And so in research, or in any sport that you do, anything you do, it might appear that you are alone, but you are actually surrounded and supported by different communities and different individuals. And so really, excellence isn't solo. Nobody has a great research idea and carries out an entire program of research all by themselves and is known as, like, the voice, right? You and I do collaborative research. We do applied research. Like, everything is team decision making. And so when I think about kind of juggling my lifestyle, I think about this as well, right? Like, I love running. I love signing up for races. It's motivating to me. I love sweating it out and gritting it out on trails with other people. But even though, like, running is kind of like solo, you get your own time result. It's not that I juggle this entirely by myself, right? Like, my husband is really supportive. My sons are really supportive. I've tapped into online communities who I just feel I might never meet these people, but they're a natural community to share my successes and challenges with, and then local communities in person as well. But juggling it all is challenging, right? Like I mentioned, I routinely wake up at 4 a.m. to get a run in or to get some strength training in. sometimes, like today, that time has to be dedicated to grading papers, which, by the way, I was grading a forced reflection for my students this morning. I forced them to reflect for points, but they seem to enjoy it by the end of the semester. But yeah, really thinking about kind of if I want to be a full person, and if I want to encourage my students to be full people and my family to be full people, I really have to take that to heart and where I prioritize my time. And so to think, okay, I love being a professor, I love doing my research, but it is my job. And so it deserves a certain amount of time on my calendar. And to really put in those other times for myself and for my family is really, really important. And I hold myself to that. So I hold myself to, maintaining the time to be Bess, maintaining the time to be mommy, and maintaining the time to be Dr. Perry, right? It really does require some commitment to that. And I am privileged to have a family structure that supports that and a financial structure that supports that. In times when I haven't had that in the past, juggling has been more difficult. But at the same time, I think that that's some of the ways in which I might, in the past, I might not have been signing up for races that might be, $50 to $100 a pop, but instead I'm still taking the time to have a walk. I'm still taking the time to make sure I'm connecting with my dog on the daily routes, and really doing it intentionally and everything. And so it doesn't mean that I'm always doing something to the extreme, but that I'm still like holding the space for myself.
Yeah, I love that a lot, Bess. And you got me thinking and reflecting on myself when you were saying that. And one of the things that I really struggle a lot with is that I will be putting time aside for family time. And that's family time. We're going to hang out. We're going to disconnect. And so, I make sure I disconnect, put the phone away and everything. And like, let's hang out and joke and laugh and have a great family moment together. But even during those moments, sometimes I'm thinking ahead, like, I got to do this next week, or I got to do these revisions on this manuscript, or I need to make these maps for this manuscript or whatnot. And I'm psychologically like kind of in the future. And I'm like, no, like I can't be doing that. And so, like that happens, I think, to all of us. But how do you identify that and kind of be like, okay, not right now. Like I want to hang out with my family. How do you say to those thoughts and kind of control them? Not right now. Like, I'll get to them when I get to them. Like they have a place in my calendar.
I mean, my first reaction to hearing that is yes. Like, I mean, I think everyone struggles with that. I struggle with that. And my second reaction is like, it's not a state of perfection, right? Like it's anything that we do is a practice. And we're used to that type of language with things like yoga, where people really who are into yoga embody it as a practice, as a journey. And I think it's also these practices of mindfulness. So it's not that I'm perfect at it. It's not that I don't have those things weighing on me when I would hope that my heart and my mind are just fully open to the moment and not to tomorrow. But it's really that repeated trying to pull yourself into the moment. And I think that people find different ways of doing it. So I have been a user of Google Calendar since it first came out in like 2006 or something like that, and the ability to have all these different calendars, different colors, see my day and like block out time in different ways. To me, like it seems silly, but like to me, if it's on my calendar and if I know there's a space for it, I can almost take a breath, right? So like if I know I have something coming up and I just put the time in for it on my calendar and I hold myself to it, I'm like, you know what? I know I have time for that. Like I know I've accounted for that. So I don't need to be thinking about it right now. Doesn't mean I won't get like awesome ideas that, a lot of times when I'm doing other things, right, your mind is free to let the monkeys in your head roam around. Like you do get ideas that are good for research or are good for things to do with your family or new things to cook or, things like that. But it just means like I don't need to be actively worrying and thinking about these things. And it is really hard. I have this mantra when I'm running. I really believe in mantras. I feel like they're a way, again, of like pulling you into the present. And I have this mantra that I really I use all the time, and it's like almost like a body check, right? Like every mile or so, I try to do a body check, like how are my ankles feeling, how are my knees feeling, how are my hips feeling, like am I stacked, am I in the posture I want to be in.
Mm.
But the mantra that I use is I say, and it kind of comes with like the footfall, right? Like juicy legs, steady breath, clear mind, open heart. And like I feel like saying that over and over to myself, it does like flush out my mind, right? Like it does, like I am in this moment, my legs are feeling awesome, my breaths are full and in line with how the terrain is going and how I am in this race. My mind is clear. It's like right in this moment, I'm just like absorbing being alive and having the opportunity to do this. And like my heart is open to like whomever I'm meeting on the trail, whatever I'm seeing on the trail, like, and it just like, it doesn't mean that like after repeating it one time, like like all of that clutter is out of my mind, but it just, I'm like, all right, I need to say it again and again and again. And like, by the time that the words are just kind of coming, like with those four kind of phrases again and again, I realize like I'm just saying the phrases and experiencing the moment instead of thinking about kind of what reviewers two said on my past paper or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation in that, that can easily be applied to during family time, right? And I'm thinking ahead of the stuff I have to do, putting together some mantras of mindfulness to be in the moment and whatnot. I'm going to practice that. I've not done that before, and I think that's a great recommendation. I have done it for running. My high school coach would embed mantras in our heads for running and races, which I thought was really cool. But I've never like done it with where I recognize an emotion, a feeling, a sensation, a thought that's in the future, and then using a mantra to get myself back into the moment. I'm going to use that. I like that a lot. And then earlier when you were discussing how you use Google Calendars to put aside chunks of time, a thing that I do different than you that I started as you just kind of hearing how you prioritize time, how you organize yourself. I organize myself by putting together, I rely on my paper calendar because I like to, and I think like I actually have a combination of one paper calendar and one digital calendar on Microsoft Outlook. But in my calendar, say for today, I will just write down in order the things that need to get done. First off, I'll bullet point the things that need to get done, and those bullet points will be accruing from weeks before for that day. And then I'll go through and I prioritize them. So then I come to my calendar 7:30 in the morning. I'm like, okay, I got like 10 things I need to get done today. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I got 10 things I need to get done today. And the difference is I'm putting together a list that looks ginormous, opposed to being like 15 minutes for this, 30 minutes for this, 1 hour for this. And I think I honestly could benefit from doing that. So I think I might have to copy you on that too, Bess.
Well, it's a practice, right? It's a practice. And so it doesn't mean like, I'm always finding new ways of doing it too and everything. And I think as a practice, it's something that we get better over time, right? Like if there are really intense things that we are going to need to, like teaching, I love teaching. I feel like I'm more confident over time with students in front of the class. I definitely cannot jump into something else 5 minutes after I'm done teaching. Like I need some space to it's like doing a performance. Like you need some space to collect yourself afterwards and that transition time and that buffer time. And so for me, having the blocks of time laid out on my calendar, I've now become better at knowing the types of tasks that need bigger buffers. And so I think that it helps me be more realistic with my time as well. And then also, things like that are challenging with family stuff or, my children, every family is different and my children need supports in different ways. And I need to build in kind of some emotional and time buffers for dealing with those too. And, yeah, so I think whatever kind of can bring you into that moment and give you the space so your mind still isn't processing what happened before, you can actually be fully into the next thing. Yeah, we do need some space in between those things.
Yeah, that's a great addition too. Another thing that I hadn't thought about is just a buffer to unwind for 10 minutes. We all need that. And the amount of buffer time needed to unwind or decompress or mentally, personally debrief it is going to be different on the event of what happened and whatnot. So I think that's a really great addition too. Bess, we have been having a wonderful conversation, but I'm starting to feel guilty that you need to get back to your grading and whatnot. And I feel like I could talk for another hour with you. This has just been wonderful. And I really loved one of the things I take small notes here and there as we were talking today. One thing that just really hit me the strongest was excellence isn't solo. I really love that a lot. So I've never heard that before. And I want to say thanks for bringing that up. And I also just want to say thanks for coming on to the show today. The way that you talked about your research and showed your passion, it was just so wonderful to hear about and to observe. And I really, thank you for taking time out of your schedule. I know you got to get back to grading and whatnot, and hopefully with the semester ending, you can get out for a couple extra runs than the norm during the semester. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining today.
Well, thanks, Brian. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to say that you are part of my community with the excellence not being solo. This fall, I finished my first 50 miler, which has been a long-standing goal of mine. And I had two did not starts before that, two races where I didn't actually even get to the start line. And so it was a long-held goal. And it might seem like that's like a solo thing, right? Like finishing 50 miles, it was huge for me. But just the conversations I've been able to have with you over the past few years and seeing what you're capable of and how you fit it into your life, it was a large part of me thinking like that was attainable for myself. And even if race number 1 didn't happen and race number 2 didn't happen, I would eventually get it done, and I did. So thank you for being part of my community too, Brian.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, congrats again on that 50 mile. That's so cool. All right, I'm going to throw on some outro music and we'll call it an episode here.